So when you're watching this or listening to this, you most likely either are aware of LDL cholesterol or you might have high LDL cholesterol yourself. And it's a very common thing. You're not the only one. Especially in men above 40, it's probably one of the most common topics when they see their doctors. And what I want to do with this episode right now here is give you the blueprint that you know exactly how to lower it, because it's obviously not a healthy thing to do, because it literally takes years of your life and puts you in an elevated risk for heart attacks and any other sorts of chronic diseases. How to lower it strategically without being dependent on medication necessarily. So if you have high cholesterol, high LDL cholesterol, borderline high, yes, having some sort of medication will short-term wise be the smartest move, but not long-term, because obviously I guess you don't want to be dependent on medication for the rest of your life. Now, what we need to understand, what drives LDL cholesterol high? The main number one thing will be carrying too much body weight, body fat. So it's usually rare. You see it way less in people that are fit, that are lean, that are having not a lot of body fat, that they also have a high LDL cholesterol. So carrying too much weight, carrying too much body fat is a direct contributor to having increased LDL cholesterol. But also, it not only in general, like overeating, which overeating is the source or the cause of having elevated body weight and elevated body fat, it's also the types of food. Usually, especially, two types of fats drive up LDL cholesterol. One is saturated fats and one is trans fats. Saturated fats, you maybe heard that before. If not, pay close attention, because that's going to be very important for you. Saturated fats most typically come in fatty animal products, and especially processed animal products, such as bacon, such as cheese, such as general like high-fat dairy products. Also like things such as ham and sausages, obviously, you have lots of saturated fats in there. We can tolerate a certain amount of fats. Generally, the rule of thumb is like 15% of your total daily calorie intake should be maximally from saturated fats. But if you're eating out a lot and you're usually going more by mood rather than intention with your food choices, it's a high chance that you're overdoing that. So dropping down on these, especially like also red meats, will help you reduce your exposure to saturated fats. Now, what also plays into that are trans fats. And trans fats you most typically see in processed foods and especially in baked goods. Anything that has oil or butter inside that has been heavily heated. Butter, by the way, also like probably one of the biggest sources of saturated fats, but especially in baked goods where you have like also oils and other saturated fats, and you heat them up to very high temperatures, the saturated fat transforms, like becomes trans fats. And trans fat versus saturated fats is a much worse story, because even there's enough studies with both saturated and trans fats where they had people eating on a so-called isocaloric diet, meaning even if they eat at maintenance, meaning they eat the amount of food that makes them exactly maintain their weight. That's what we call as calorie maintenance. So they eat at maintenance, even if and when they've been eating at maintenance, obviously you're not gaining any additional fat. But because they've been giving them higher amounts of saturated fats and higher amounts of trans fats, they've seen blood plasma concentration of LDL cholesterol still going up. And these people still, even if they look lean, having higher LDL cholesterol levels. And you see that most typically also like in this new cult with the carnivore crowd. With all honesty, in my opinion, the carnivore people are the new flat earthers, because they take cherry pick studies that speak in their favor, mechanistical studies that just like explain a mechanism why something should be good, but they're ignoring what really matters, and that is human outcome data. Like what actually happens to people if you do this and that. And it's a little bit of a funny thing. It's like it's similar, like same cognitive dissonance as flat earthers have. Now, not to just like pick on them, but to actually like give you the most practical thing. Before we actually get into that, like how can you lower your LDL cholesterol? I had a client that is right now like active in my program that is around like 30% body fat. To give you a range, he's 168, I think. So not the tallest, but he's been at 98 kilos. Like obviously like visibly overweight, category obese when he started probably initially. Like he's doing way, way better right now, dropped a lot of kilos. But when he went to his doctors and we had our first initial strategy call, He was like, oh yeah, I have my blood markers. I mean, cholesterol is not like stellar, but it's also not outside of the reference range. It's like in the upper range. That's interesting. So, because what is important to understand that LDL cholesterol alone is not the most important or the strongest indicator of your cardiovascular risk, meaning your risk of having a heart attack, a stroke, or any other cardiac related event. LDL cholesterol is one of the stronger ones, definitely, but the most important one, and that is the most clear in like describing and really showing your actual risk of cardiovascular disease, is what we call ApoB. ApoB is the most accurate value that you can get from your medical doctor that will assess your cardiovascular risk. And most likely your medical professional is, as of right now, not including that in your test. Why is that? ApoB has not been taught in universities 10, 15 years ago. And for you to understand, this is a very general like problem that I see in the medical system. Medical knowledge has a half-life, depending on the area, let's say 4 years. So that means after 4 years, half of the information in the medical system is outdated. After 4 years, 50% of the medical knowledge is outdated. And now imagine your doctor that has been practicing for 10, 20 years. How much up to date is he actually? And the other problem is, and that also happens in nutrition sciences, unfortunately. That's why not I'm priding myself on my degree or anything like that, because like if I would only base my knowledge on like what I learned back then, like it would be pretty miserable, to be fair. Like I would be really, really far behind. If something will be discovered new today in nutrition sciences and medicine, it will first take years until it's acknowledged, right? Because there has to be multiple studies, because you cannot make recommendations based on one study. So you have to first make multiple study, then you have to make intervention studies, then you like observational studies. That in itself can take years, if not decades. Then it has to be acknowledged by I don't know in the medical system what the society is called, who makes the medical guidelines. But for example, in the nutritional institutions, in the nutrition space, where I'm a little bit more sophisticated, it has to be acknowledged from the nutritional institutions, right? Whatever country that is in. And until it's being done through the studies, acknowledged by the nutritional institutions process, because nutritional institutions also, they don't release guidelines every year. They usually update them every couple of years, if not every few years or 5 to 10 years. Can happen in some situations. And then until this information makes it into the book and into the college rooms and into the lectures, it can take up to decades. So if somebody prides themselves in like, oh, I learned this in university, like, yeah, applause. Like you learned probably something that has been discovered 20, 30 years ago. It's maybe not the most up to date. So that's why it's very important for anybody in the medical, nutritional, exercise science space to not only rely on what has been communicated in the classroom, but what is actually happening today out there and being up to date with the scientific knowledge. Now, going away from this little bit of a rant, just to like help you understand like what that actually means. When you do your test next time, ideally get your ApoB tested. You have to explicitly ask your medical professional. And what you ideally also want to get tested is your LPA, your lipoprotein A. This is something that you only have to measure once in a lifetime, because that's heavily genetically dependent and that's usually doesn't change a lot. And that can give you an indication of how to read your LDL cholesterol. Because, for example, if the higher your LPA is, it's like an LP and then small a, the higher your LPA is, the more serious you have to take your LDL cholesterol. So if you have a super low LPA and your cholesterol is like borderline high, it's probably not that dangerous. It always have to be anyway, like made in the context of the whole blood work, because you never look at single markers alone. You always have to assess the whole thing, because having one marker elevated versus everything else is a different story than having all of them slightly elevated. It's completely different stories. So that's why you always have to make sure that's being read by someone that really understands blood work. So testing LPA, you usually only need to do that once. LDL cholesterol can be fine. I would always, if you want to test it, ApoB. That's the most reliable marker. Now, when you know that, and most likely there's a high correlation, it doesn't have to be, but coming back to that client example, his LDL was okay, but his ApoB was high, dangerously high. So that meaning like in the next 10 years, he would have an increased risk of having an heart attack, unnecessarily high increased risk of a heart attack. And that's obviously not something that you want to, a situation that you want to be in, neither for yourself or when you think about your family. What will you leave behind? If you leave your kids behind with like having a heart attack and being gone like that, if something that is preventable, pretty fucked up. I would say, especially if it's in your power. Now, obviously, we got him on certain protocols. We optimized his nutrition, his training, his supplementation also, because at that stage, it definitely also makes sense to have an updated supplementation protocol. But the main factor, or the most important thing, like the most important lever next to short-term interventions like medications to reduce your LDL cholesterol or your ApoB is to reduce your body fat percentage, your weight, but your weight in form of body fat percentage, because you obviously don't want to lose muscle mass, you want to lose body fat. And to lose body fat, you have to optimize your nutrition, your diet. Exercise can help, and doing a little bit of cardio doesn't hurt. But the big rocks, and I explained that in a different episode, what really matters if you want to have a physical body transformation where you really reduce in a systematic and strategic way your body fat, you have to address the nutrition first. Because you probably heard it before, you can't outrun a bad diet. And it's the same with LDL cholesterol. Because your LDL cholesterol, somebody that is sedentary but has a healthy diet is maybe not the healthiest person, but they don't have high LDL cholesterol. They're just like having other problems when it comes with being sedentary. But high LDL cholesterol or high ApoB, a high increased cardiovascular risk, is primarily driven by lifestyle choices, by what you're eating. There's obviously other things that also like increase it additionally, such as stress and like other bad habits. But nutrition, what you eat 2-3 times a day, is the most profound thing. If you want to find out how you can also like reduce your body fat systematically with a strategic approach, down below in the show notes, in the description, you'll find a link where I break down the exact 4-phase transformation system that we used to transform hundreds of high-performing men and getting them into the best shape possible without having them to live out of Tupperware, living in the gym, or just like make any other sorts of sacrifices in their life that somebody with a lot of responsibilities simply cannot do. Down is below, thefithighperformer.com/strategy if you want to find out more about that. But to leave this up, you also have to be one last thing that you have to be aware of. And this is not my quote. This is from Peter Tia, a great medical doctor that is specializing in human performance, that goes, medicine is great at keeping you from dying, but it's terrible at helping you living well. So your doctor will be ringing the bell and alarming you, obviously, if you're like close to having a heart attack or getting into like a really bad situation. But he's not necessarily there to like help you have more energy, feel better, change your body transformation, because that's not what they do. They're keeping you from dying, but they're not helping you living well. And that's exactly what we actually do and made that mission. So again, if you want to see how that works, down below, thefithighperformer.com/strategy, there's a link down below. We've done that over and over and over again with hundreds of high-performing men in similar situations to you, traveling weekly, family, lots of responsibilities, long hours. And it's not because you're busy, it's just because you don't have the system in place to make it work with your lifestyle. And traditional personal training and typical diet plans and intermittent fasting, they have all failed. Enough with the generic fitness advice. You need something that fits your lifestyle, your schedule, your responsibilities, and your goals. Again, link is down below in the description, and then I'll see you in the next episode.